Okay, so my name is Avner. I'm going to give a bit of a different kind of presentation from what you're used to, more Tel Aviv style. I hope you'll excuse me and bear with me. So I'm the Director of Economic Development in the city of Tel Aviv. It's a pretty new concept in Israel to have a city that's leading its own sort of strategic economic development, formulation for economic development. And the reason why, specifically in Israel, Israel is such a small country that it was never really necessary for a city within Israel to lead its own strategy. But I think that today, the sort of extreme convergence of the global economy into the localities, the cities, have made it even necessary even in Israel, such a small country of about 7 million people population, with Tel Aviv as its main business center, to in fact have an entity within the city of Tel Aviv that leads the formulation of our strategy for global competitiveness. So how many people, has anyone here been to Tel Aviv? Oh, wow, okay. So maybe this isn't necessary, but a little about Tel Aviv. So the city was founded in 1909 by 66 families. This is in fact the photograph of those 66 families, and this is a lottery where they gave out the plots of land in the city, and here we see that they wrote the names of all the families on seashells, and then there was there were white seashells and gray seashells, which they picked from the beach, and they wrote names of the families and names of the plots of land, numbers of plots of land, and then a boy and a girl picked from each hat, and that's how they gave out the land. And in fact, the great-grandchildren of these families are now very wealthy, because this area is very, very expensive real estate. So on this, they built the city of Tel Aviv. This is Rothschild Boulevard. For anyone who's been there, you may know it. It's actually where most of the tech scene is concentrated today in Tel Aviv. And in fact, just opposite the espresso kiosk over here is where eBay just opened its innovation center about a year ago after acquiring the Gifts project, an Israeli startup. Based on that acquisition, they established the Israel Innovation Center for eBay, which deals with innovation for e-commerce. So this is really the sort of the region. Tel Aviv is located between east and west, as I'm sure you know. The area is 52 kilometers squared, and if we compare that with London, you can see how minuscule the city of Tel Aviv is. Population of just 400,000, but if we look at the greater Tel Aviv metropolis, then we're talking about almost half of the population of the state of Israel. It's a very young city. Over 33% of the people in the city, of the population, are between the age of 18 and 35. The reason why that is because all the young people from all over Israel converge into Tel Aviv at that time of their life. Usually when you get married and start having children, Tel Aviv is too expensive, so you move back out. But especially when you're single, when you're a bachelor, Tel Aviv is the place to be. A lot of single young men and single young women and single young men and single young men and everything else. 14 kilometers of sandy beaches, 120 kilometers of bicycle routes, 220,000 trees, 4,000 Bauhaus buildings. In 2008, we were nominated World Heritage Site by UNESCO for having the highest concentration of Bauhaus buildings in the world. Best Gay City for 2011. There's a lot of that going on in Tel Aviv. I see there's some Germans over there as well. That's good. And the New York Times called us the capital of Mediterranean cool. Okay, so what has all this got to do with startups, which is what we're here to discuss? And the answer is, of course, the creative environment, the creative class. Richard Florida, who's a famous urban theorist, talks about this new emerging class in the new global economy, the creative class, and they're attracted to cities. He calls it the 3 T's: talent, technology, and tolerance. And he talks about this creative class as the new class of people who no longer want to have 40, 50-year careers like our grandparents used to have, or even our parents, but people who want to express themselves in the workplace. They want to feel part of the place that they're working at, and as a result, they keep on jumping from workplace to workplace, and many times they start their own companies and, of course, startups. And one part of that creative class is, of course, the geeks who make it tick in Tel Aviv, and we have a lot of them. Tel Aviv is a serious concentration of these geeks and hundreds of world-class geek talent. A lot of them come through the military, where they serve in elite intelligence units, and at the age of 18, 19, they're already developing projects in the cutting-edge technology that civilians or regular people in the world don't even know exists yet, and they're not just dealing with these technologies, but at the age of 20, they're already commanding and leading teams within the military. So they're coming out of the military at the age of 21, 22 with already experience of leading projects in cutting-edge technology. Furthermore, we also have leading academic institutions, the famous Technion in Haifa, which is a leading engineering school. Dozens of co-working spaces and accelerator programs for these people. This is literally in the last 2-3 years, there's really suddenly, there's a growth of these places in Tel Aviv. Meetup and tech events. Over 99% of the tech events and meetups in Israel are in Tel Aviv. And this is where, all the entrepreneurs and engineers and the programmers, they all meet and network and exchange ideas. Experienced mentors. So the Israeli I hope I'm not talking too fast. Am I talking too fast? No. So the Israeli high-tech industry exists since the early 90s. So we already have these generations of high-tech professionals, investors, and entrepreneurs who can already advise the next generation. We already have, I guess, the grandparents and of the tech industry. And as a result, we have over 800 early-stage startups in the city of Tel Aviv. There's over 1,200 high-tech companies. Of them, 800 are early stage. There's about 30 to 40 foreign multinational companies. I'm talking about in the city of Tel Aviv. And of course, the beach, bars, and the fun, which is an important aspect of a true startup ecosystem. So as a result, we were in a recent research by Startup Genome, we were ranked fifth best place in the world to open a startup. The ranking was after Silicon Valley, New York, London, Toronto, which was surprising, and then Tel Aviv. And I think if you compare that list, Tel Aviv, to all the cities above it, Silicon Valley, New York, London, and Toronto, if you compare it for size, geographic location, geopolitical situation, it shows that Tel Aviv truly has some unique asset that places it so high with those cities. Recently, Ben Rooney in the Wall Street Journal, the tech editor of the Wall Street Journal, called Tel Aviv Europe's main technology hub. So what makes things work? What actually makes it work in Tel Aviv? So first of all, pluralism and diversity. I truly believe that creativity and innovation can't truly happen in a place where there's no freedom of speech, where there's no diversity, where there's no pluralism. I think there's a lot of countries in the world, without naming any names, who are trying to promote these things, but unfortunately their political situation is that there's still no freedom of press, no freedom of speech. And I think that until those countries get over that hurdle, it will be very difficult for them to create true innovation hubs. Tel Aviv and Israel as a whole is very unique in that aspect. There's the diversity of the different religions. There's obviously Arab Christians, Muslims, and Jews, but also within the Jewish population, because a lot of the Jews came from the diaspora, from different countries all over the world, you actually have this unique situation where in such a small city, if you want to go out to have dinner, you can choose from, I think, nearly every type of cultural cuisine in the world, from the classic European, French food, Italian food, to Ethiopian food, Iraqi food, everything, because you have so many people who came from so many countries. So it really is an inspiring in that sense. Daring. I love this picture. Daring. You know, one of the speakers before me mentioned the importance of not fearing failure and daring to go out and taking the risk. Deep technology talent, as I mentioned before. And I say deep technology, not just technology, and I'll come back to that because Tel Aviv's true strength is in the real back-end, hardcore, deep technology. The cumulative experience, again, based on all the almost over 2 decades of the high-tech industry in Israel. So there's really all this experience accumulated, and walkability and serendipity. One of the greatest assets of Tel Aviv, I think, which I identified in contrast to other cities in the world like New York, London, maybe not Silicon Valley, is the fact that it's so small. Now, on one hand, it's a challenge, it's a problem that we're so small, we don't have a local market. On the other hand, there's that walkability and serendipity. Tel Aviv has over 300 days of sunshine. So a lot of our time is spent outside in cafes, sitting outside, and there's a lot of chance meetings that happen where networks are created and information is exchanged, and that's so important in the new economy. I'll give an example. You know, I don't know how precise and true the story is, but it gives a sense. I heard this actually from the guy who founded Meta Cafe, which was a company, an Israeli company very similar to YouTube. And one of the reasons he says why he failed, I don't think it's the only reason, but the YouTube were in the same area as MySpace. And the story goes that people from YouTube and people from MySpace were sitting in, I don't know, some restaurant, and they knew each other, or they were friendly, or they had some connection. And the people from and suddenly they had this idea. People from MySpace said, well, you know, why wouldn't you embed videos into MySpace, for example? And that was how the whole concept of embedding came about, perhaps, according to the story. And of course, now we know that most of the videos that are watched on YouTube aren't actually through the actual website, but through different websites that the videos are embedded in, Facebook, etc. So that just shows the importance of that knowledge transfer and that serendipity and chance meetings. So again, this is the networks and the knowledge transfer, which is so important. And Israel as a whole, in Tel Aviv, because it's a very non-hierarchical society, there's no hierarchy. We have absolutely no respect for hierarchy. We feel very comfortable to talk to, you know, it doesn't matter if it's CEO of a big company. It makes it possible to make use of these mentors and, you know, you send someone emails, hey, can I meet for coffee, you know, bounce some things off you, and it usually happens. So this is a question I don't show my boss, but so if everything's so great, what the hell is my job? And the answer is obviously that you can't just tread on the spot. The economy is constantly changing, and certainly now the global economy, the digital economy is rapidly changing exponentially. So my job is to formulate Tel Aviv strategy and see where we're going to be in you know, once it used to be where we're going to be 5 years down the line. Today it's where we're going to be 6 months down the line, or at least 2 years down the line. So the first thing is obviously seeing how we continue to generate economic growth in the city. And the second is staying competitive in light of all the changes that are happening globally. So this is an interesting question, first of all, to ask how do startups actually generate economic growth? And the answer, obviously, there's always further spillovers and more sort of circles of spillovers, but I think the main things are, first of all, FDI and capital. Startups generate opportunity, which attracts investment. A recent research done by the Kaufman Institute showed that startups create more jobs on net than existing businesses, and certainly than large multinationals, large companies. Then there's the micro M&Es, the micro multinationals. Startups sort of, there's this new idea of startups being micro multinationals in the sense that you can have, you know, 10 people, a 10-people company having sales throughout the world. and generating huge revenue with a very small team, and that's obviously because internet makes the global economy very accessible, and there's minimum bureaucracy and overhead. And of course, the innovation, because of their size, because of their collaborative nature, their agility, nimbleness, startups are a lot, it's a lot easier for startups to generate innovation rather than the large companies. And I think what's important in innovation is the spillover into the local industries, which creates growth in other, even traditional industries. This is one of the problems in Israel, that we don't have enough spillover of innovation into our own local industries. So a lot of times we export all the technology, and we don't make our own industries more efficient. Staying competitive. We've identified two major challenges in this respect. First of all, cities. Especially since the recent financial crisis, a lot of countries and cities in the world have recognized the importance of the innovation economy and the importance of creating these innovation hubs, which means that the last 2 decades that Israel has had sort of, walking along, developing this great high-tech industry, it's all over now. Now we're truly having to compete in a way that we haven't had to compete in the past. In the past, it's just more or less been us in Silicon Valley. And today there's a lot of really, really great hubs being created. So that's a very important challenge that we have to deal with. The second thing is plastic. Well, it's not really plastic. I'm just trying to get your attention. But I'd like to compare what's happened in the sort of digital revolution to what happened with plastic. Imagine that plastic never existed. Plastic doesn't exist, and suddenly tomorrow some guy comes and invents plastic. And what you're going to have is, first of all, you're going to have this period of plastic itself being developed. So plastic at the beginning probably wasn't very durable, wasn't very safe. There were all sorts of problems with plastic, so you'd have all sorts of scientists and engineers working on plastic, trying different formulas to make a better type of plastic, different types of plastics for different uses. And once they go through that period of, a few years of sort of developing and seeing how you can make it more safe and how you can make it this and how you can make it that, then you start having the applications of plastic. And I think like plastic, there's no end. I mean, we can't imagine a world without plastic. I think the same thing is happening with the internet and with the digital revolution. We have this situation where for the last 20 years we've been developing infrastructure and technologies, and that's what I mentioned before about the deep technologies. Israel's high-tech industry is based on communications, on optics, on the back end of the technological revolution, and now we're suddenly, plastic's been created. There's not that much more that's going to change in plastic. There's obviously always going to be slight developments, but it's here. And now it's all about making that plastic into things that we can use, from cups to bicycles to cars to God knows what. And what's unique in this new situation is that when you apply plastic to different products, you no longer need the engineers as much as you need designers, as much as you need marketing and business specialists, as much as you need sales. And this is another challenge for Tel Aviv and for Israel as a whole, because our greatest asset is our deep technological talents, our engineers. And we need to see how we can connect that with front-end industry and design in order to be able to leverage our technology know-how into the future. So what kind of environment allows startups to flourish? First of all, the supportive environment. The truth is a lot of what I'm saying now is already being discussed by my previous speakers. Top talent and smart capital. So supportive environment, policy and regulation, we've heard about that today. Culture and pluralism, as I mentioned, cluster and networks. Top talent come out of the academia, international firms that also are a sort of breeding ground for talent, train talent and connect them to the global economy. And a broad skill set. This is what I mentioned now about the need for not just technology, but a broad skill set, including design, UX, UI, marketing, etc. Smart capital based on cumulative experience, mentorship, and smart money. Now, what I want to add is the importance of local industry. I think as we see the convergence into sort of different innovation hubs throughout the world, we're going to have to develop, I think what's going to develop is niche innovation hubs. So all these different innovation hubs that are developing will have a certain niche that they will specialize in, and that niche will be decided by the local industry in that city. So for example, Tel Aviv's industry was based on, or was born from the military industry, which is why we have a lot of optics and communications, and that's where it came from. Silicon Valley, as its name suggests, used to be more microchips. So once you have that basis, I think that the different innovation hubs will take on the characteristics of the industry assets that they have in that country. I think we heard today about obviously what's happening here in Munich and the strengths of your industry. So leveraging those local skills, again, because it's now front end, you've got to connect to the local skills and local know-how in each hub and the industry support to have the support of that local industry. So what's Tel Aviv doing? First of all, recruiting support from the general public. This is an important part. You know, when you're spending public money, you need the public to understand what you're spending it on. And the Tel Aviv, the startup ecosystem in Tel Aviv is, we've got to make sure that people understand what's going on. A lot of people only hear about startups when there's a great exit. You suddenly hear about some guy who sold his company for 100 million. And that's what they read in the paper. And what we're trying to do is, first of all, expose the general public to the startup scene. We're now, actually this is tomorrow, it starts tomorrow, which is an open startup. We're opening 60 startups in the city and allowing the general public to just visit the startups. They're just going to be able to walk in and meet the entrepreneurs and see what they're developing and talk to them. And that's a two-day program that we have starting tomorrow. The next thing is promoting our existing strength. So, for example, we've opened what we call the library. It's actually a public library. It was a public library. It still is a public library. But we've taken part of it and we've turned it into a co-working space for startups. Okay, so this is something that we're starting to do with public libraries in order to give our local startups a very cheap place to start working. This is the view from the library, a beautiful view of Jaffa and the sea. The third thing is creating an accessible urban environment. We want to attract talent from abroad. As I said, Tel Aviv has this challenge, great technological talent, a bit of a lack of front-end know-how. So what we want to do is bring that know-how from abroad. In order to do that, we need to make the city more accessible to international talents, making sure the signage is all in English, the internet site, lowering barriers. For example, we're now developing a startup visa, which will be a special visa for foreign startups, foreign talents wanting to come to work in Tel Aviv. Oh, by the way, I forgot to mention, we also have Wi-Fi, free city Wi-Fi that we're developing throughout Tel Aviv. We already have in some areas, and in the next couple of years, we hope to already have the whole of the city networked. And the fifth thing is establishing international presence and partnerships, which is obviously part of why I'm here. But also such things as the DLD. You may know we have the DLD now. We just had it 2 weeks ago, the second time in Tel Aviv. So getting our name out there, making sure people know that Tel Aviv is a great, attractive place to have to open a startup or connect with startups. So I think that's a sort of, based on these 5 things, we're obviously developing a lot of projects. But I think the bottom line, there's a great blog written by Paul Graham from Silicon Valley, from Y Combinator. And he talks about the character of a city. He talks about the fact that different cities have a different personality. For example, he brings Los Angeles is oh, he asked, how do you know what the personality of the city is? And he says, well, it depends on what people in that city, what they respect. So he says, for example, in LA, people respect famous people. It doesn't matter if you're a drug addict, it doesn't matter if you beat your wife. If you're famous, you're in. New York, people respect money. Okay, if you're wealthy, if you have a beautiful car and a beautiful house, that's what people respect. And, you know, he talks about Silicon Valley, but I'm going to talk about Tel Aviv. I think the thing that people respect in Tel Aviv is the daring of the entrepreneurs. I have a friend who recently sold his company to Facebook for a lot of money, apparently around $100 million. And I said to him, so, you know, you're going to buy a nice car, a Porsche or something? And he was like, you know, people will laugh at me. If I come to work in a Porsche in Tel Aviv, people will just laugh at you. It's not something that people respect. People respect the entrepreneurial spirit, and if you succeed and make a lot of money, that's great. Everyone's happy for you, but you don't flaunt it. That's not the character of the city. And I think at the end of the day, that's what we're going to see. We're going to see sort of the different characters and personalities of cities come out, and I think the true innovation hubs will be those places that learn to respect the will of people to express themselves and to make a change in the world. Thank you very much.